Welcome to Machine Minds, where technology and humanity meet. I'm your host, Thru, founder of Samson Rose, a recruiting and search business focused on the robotics and AI industries. The Machine Minds show is where we dive deep into the intricate world of robotics and artificial intelligence. As a staffing industry leader with a passion for the frontiers of technology, I'm pleased to be bringing you intimate conversations with the founders, investors, and trailblazers who are at the heart of the AI and robotics revolution. In each episode, we dig into their journeys, the applications of the products they're working on, and the breakthroughs that are shaping our future. Join us as we explore how these machine minds are transforming the way we live, work, and understand our world. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or just curious about this amazing field, you'll learn something new with each episode. Let's delve into the extraordinary. Let's delve into machine minds. Hello and welcome to Machine Minds. I'm your host, Thru, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Aleks Gampel, co-founder of Cuby. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Let's jump into it. So Aleks, as you know, I like to start with our guests' background. So can you briefly share about your career path and your background before you actually started the founding journey with Cuby?
Yeah, I have definitely had a non-linear path. I think many of the folks you talk to have probably had non-linear paths, but if I were to summarize it, it's really at the intersection of traditional real estate development, real estate finance, private equity, et cetera, and the way it intersects with technology. So anything that is accelerating the pace of innovation that sits on top of the real estate, the built environment, et cetera. So that's where most of my career has been planted.
Interesting. So it's primarily been on that technology side within real estate, or
No, it's more traditional real estate, and then evolving myself into technologies that then sit on top of real estate. So always tangentially around the built environment.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Which is obviously a great place to be when you found a company like Cuby, and I want to get into that. But what initially led to the founding of Cuby? Can you share like that kind of aha moment when you realized that the solution was necessary? And, you know, obviously it's not just you've got your co-founder as well, Oleg. So yeah, tell us about that.
I think it's seldom times where there's truly aha moments, but I did a bunch of things in my career, but when I was weaning off of a development business that I was involved in, a real estate development business, I saw that we had access to a lot of capital, but we didn't have access to physically the ability to execute on all the projects, mainly because of the constraint around skilled labor, meaning we couldn't physically hire enough general contractors, enough subcontractors to go build what we needed to go build. And I like to think of myself as a high risk tolerance developer, meaning I'm willing to try new technologies, even if they're risky. Developers tend to be risk averse. And I started looking for different ways in which we could build more efficiently. So I think hardware, software solutions whose aim was essentially to industrialize construction. Think about building buildings the same way we build, cars. None of the existing solutions that I've interviewed or tried to be a customer of made sense to me. Around that same time, I was in my search 3.5 years ago, introduced to my partner, Oleg. Oleg comes from a very heavy lean manufacturing background, building hardware, deep tech companies, et cetera. He at the time was building his own headquarters. So his company was expanding. He had 200 engineers full time. It was time to go into a new building, new headquarters. He decided to build it. So he hired a developer at GC, and he quickly saw how the construction industry, how working with a general contractor developer is like the complete 180 to his skill set, which is lean manufacturing. And he quickly said that he's going to apply his next 30 years into this space because it's massive and kind of his talent can help improve it. I met him kind of at ideation phase, and he had a very simple thesis of how to do it. And that's how we met. And I basically quit my job to commercialize this with him.
Amazing. I've heard time and time again that the best robotics companies are started by someone or co-founders are one who really understands the industry that they're trying to have an impact on. So in this case, the construction industry, and then someone else who really understands the technical side and the engineering side. So this seems like match made in heaven, which is awesome. So no wonder you guys are doing so well. And I don't know if they got to an actual point of it, but how did you initially validate the idea that you guys are doing. And I guess, sorry, before we actually do that, can you give the audience an overview of Cuby if they don't know, if they haven't done their research prior to this episode?
Yeah, so I guess like the generic, what is Cuby is we're a full stack technology business. We build both hardware and software, and that hardware and software enables process improvement in new home construction. The way we do that, and I guess the TLDR, is we design, develop, deploy mobile microfactories that then manufacture and assemble homes for everybody, really. So that's what we do. So our product is a mobile microfactory. It's hard, I guess, for your audience to visualize it without me showing it, but imagine you take several dozen shipping containers, shove a bunch of equipment inside of them, inflate a tent on top, essentially, and quick erect a factory near or on sometimes where there's demand for homes. And this allows us, and really one KPI for us is the reduction in skilled labor. We're doing all of this to essentially be able to build more homes with fewer hands. That's the fundamental question we're answering. How can we do that?
Amazing. Yeah, I don't know if there's specific videos or links that you want to share, but anything that you do give us and just general links and videos, we will put in the show notes for our listeners to have a look at as well, because it's fascinating and it's hugely interesting and hugely impactful. So how did you initially validate this idea? Was it like a test project that you did, or how did you get to the point of this is how we're going to do what we're going to do?
Yeah, so obviously initially it seemed batshit crazy. Who's dumb enough to go copy and paste hundreds of factories and erect them near the construction site? So easy, right? So we were trying to kill two birds with one stone. One of them was around enabling, like I said, the ability to build many homes with very little skilled labor. The second was, how do we do that while also having a better product that is better for the planet, et cetera. My validation personally came from process of elimination of why I couldn't work with any of the other companies that have ever tried this in industrialized construction. Oleg's process validation was very first principles. He's a very good engineer. That's how he thinks. And essentially the consensus was around three variables, let's call them that, or three core pillars as to what we're doing. One is gigafactories don't work in the space. Really capital intensive, laborious to go and build, right? Take 2 to 7 years to build a factory. Plus the product that you're ultimately creating, whether it's a kit of parts, right? Like Legos for a house, or whether it's the entire house, because sometimes folks make entire houses and ship the houses. Doesn't make much sense to ship thousands of miles because it's very different than shipping AirPods. You're shipping an entire home. You add that up over the year, and that's millions of square feet, millions of tons of output that you're shipping thousands of miles. There's a really good saying in logistics. It's called don't ship air, which obviously this goes against. So pillar number one for us was, how do we create factories that can be quickly erected, low capex, and how do we close the gap, that feedback loop between the physical construction site where the home is being built and the offset manufacturing process. So to close that gap, we said, let's bring this thing closer to the site. So that's pillar number one. It's around decentralized distributed manufacturing. So how do we create a network of smaller footprint factories that are highly efficient? The second pillar was really around what we saw missing in the market, which is a lot of folks are over engineering what a home is at the end of the day, right? Like homes have been built the same way for the last 200 years in the US. We haven't really changed that. And it's super conservative as soon as the industry itself. So as soon as you change, you kind of have low incumbent adoption, which is a big problem. But on top of that, people don't realize building a home is a highly regulated space. So a lot of compliance involved with, putting up a home. No one wants you to, combust on fire, have the home fall over when there's, 30 miles of wind, right? So it's a highly regulated space. The trick around the regulation is there's 26,000 different zoning codes. Different counties have different ways that they allow you to build. So we said to ourselves that it's impossibly hard to have, in a way, a proprietary product because you won't scale 26,000 times. Two, as soon as you start changing different materials that folks are used to in construction, as soon as you really start changing that end product and over-engineering it, incumbents have a very tough time accepting new things, let's put it that way. So we said, let's keep the end product the same as much as we can, so the end home the same. So we solved around certain regulation. We solved around our home being vastly different than what, say, a top 20 home builder builds. So we're trying to play within the confines of what's allowed. And the third pillar is kind of simple, but for some reason hasn't been obvious. You can't go to market preaching the whole Roadster to Model 3 scenario, meaning you start out as this, expensive solution that few will adopt, and then eventually you hit scale, and that critical scale unlocks unit economics, which unlock cost reduction. Unfortunately, in this space, you'll just die very quickly if you can't be at cost parity or cheaper than incumbents. So we told ourselves, unless we can get to a certain X number per foot, that's very in line with where the market is, and actually lower where we are today, then incumbents aren't going to care to try it. Because developers, all they care about, home builders, all they care about is yield on cost, so their return on investment. So it matters to be at cost parity or below. So those are kind of like the three things we're bouncing around.
That's, fascinating. And when you explain it like that, it makes a lot of sense. Right? If you're looking at doing a business or product at scale, how do you make it replicatable, reducing those barriers, things like that? And are they all single family homes, or what is the end product?
Yeah, so it's funny. We consider our product the actual mobile microfactory. It's a very different business mentality to think about, kind of like one factory that produces lots of products versus how do we make hundreds of these factories. That's a very different thing day zero when you build. It creates a lot of constraints. We think of our product as the mobile microfactory itself. That mobile microfactory then makes a kit of parts. It's also the machines that make the kit of parts, like I'm describing kind of the layers of the IP. And it's also the software that sits on top to help us operate that entire process vertically integrated end to end, from like taking in the raw inputs, making them into stuff that goes into a home, to then putting the home together on site. So for us, the product is the mobile microfactory. The end product is a home at the end of the day, and any type of home. So we right now do detached single family homes. It's a massive market opportunity. If you look at the US alone, depending on what you read, I like this number. It's somewhere in the middle, but we apparently need around 3.8 million homes in the US. That's today. That's like the current supply demand gap. Average cost of a home to a US buyer is around $500,000. So you're talking about $2 trillion of unmet demand. So that's the opportunity. Just as sticking around in single family is a massive space. We don't even have to look left and right to other asset classes, to multifamily. We will eventually, but we don't have to. That's how big the market is. And that's just the US.
Wow. I think I read somewhere that your co-founder lives in one, right? Or
yeah, so,
did I make that up?
Yeah, so I think you know this, given you recruit for a lot of deep tech companies. You obviously know that. And honestly, we tend to be placed into deep tech, but to me, like real deep tech is binary risk. We're not that. There's not like a regulatory hurdle we have to like meet. It's not like meaning like regulation has to change for our product to work. We're not necessarily doing things that are like truly binary outcomes. Humanoids are a binary outcome. Mining, asteroids is a binary outcome. We've taken a bunch of things off the shelf, put them all together to this industry, and kind of applied things that have already been tested across different spheres and applying them here. So we're not a true binary outcome. And we're building homes at the end of the day. It's not that speculative. But the way we've done this is generally deep tech, as you know, is very capital intensive. It's very hard to build in this space, requires a lot of engineering hours before you can get to commercialization. Hence, there's this scale of TRL, right, technology readiness level, which was invented by NASA. You go from 0 to 9, 9 being like commercial ready. We went from 0 to now about 8, raising a very little amount, surprisingly, which I can talk about offline. But we did that because we set up a pretty big manufacturing and R&D center in Eastern Europe, where our engineers and our cost of human labor is a lot less. So we're arbitraging kind of the risk to get to commercialization through more cost-effective human resources, if you will.
Interesting. And for you, from that perspective, well, I guess a couple of things. One, obviously, your co-founder had this large engineering understanding and team, and has built this kind of function prior to starting Cuby. And yourself, you had your experience building multiple different types of properties before. Your previous experiences, how do you think that those have kind of shaped your vision and passion for this company? And then how does that go in hand with like the cost mitigation and offshoring and stuff like that? Was there stuff in your previous experience that brought that to this place?
Yeah. Well, I think for one, I think a lot of folks we meet and have met across the journey describe Oleg and I as scrappy. I think that's maybe the good word there. We don't necessarily subscribe or play the venture game. And what I mean by that is we're not building a business whose intent is to keep on fundraising. Like, I feel like a lot of companies these days in the US, it almost feels like their full-time job is to fundraise. It feels like that's what they have to do to keep the business going. That was never the intent. We're very focused on unit economics. We're very focused on what you're asking, which is cost of capital. Personally, coming from private equity, it's a very different world than venture. So I think a lot of my thinking is shaped by that understanding of the world. And two, I spent a lot of time early on at WeWork as part of my different career paths that I've taken. WeWork was obviously the wrong cost of capital. You were using venture dollars to build out office space, to take long-term leases, spend something that theoretically needs 100% IRR on furniture. So essentially, we're really thoughtful about cost of capital of launching factories. You need venture capital. It's important, especially for R&D and to get to that TRL of 9. But once you're there, you should not be spending venture dollars. Everything going forward should be different cost of capital. Like for us, we're very keen to unlock project finance for all the subsequent factories that we do. And we're trying to do a lot. End of the day, we're trying to do 275 mobile microfactories in 10 years. It's not venture that should be funding that.
Interesting. Yeah.
And Oleg's path kind of informed by the fact that he's never taken venture prior. He's self-funded every business that he's been involved in. So, debt and just personal reinvested capital. So it's a different mentality.
Wow. Yeah. Fascinating. I honestly, I haven't thought of, or I haven't had that conversation with founders previously. We've always talked about different types of investment, like whether you're going after like grants, SBIR type things, or self-funding, bootstrapping, family, friends, etc. But when you're looking at something so capital intensive, and then the return on investment, like the timelines and stuff like that, makes a ton of sense. And are there any other forms of finance that you think people should be aware of in this space?
I mean, I think debt is just always a great instrument. It can come in different forms, in specifically categories of deep tech or hardware. It's everything from project finance to equipment leasing, and everything in between. I do think like public sector funding is interesting. It's not for everyone, but it's interesting. In fact, we definitely have a goal of funding each one of our mobile microfactories with some sort of local help, given that we're creating 260 jobs per mobile microfactory, most of which are unskilled, meaning they're not construction workers, which is what's missing from the industry, but they're unskilled folks that we can train over the course of 2 months to perform really highly skilled functions that otherwise would be performed by highly skilled functions. We also, per mobile microfactory, create 200 homes, which in theory are a lower cost than what's offered in the market. So we become like this interesting local story of how we can help the market, and it only costs $10 million to launch one of our factories, which means that that's potentially a rounding error in some local mayor's budget. So we hope that folks can see that and help subsidize some of that cost.
That's huge. Yeah, it
so
completely
public
reduces
sector is important. Yeah.
Yeah. How long do one of these mobile factories stay in place for?
Yeah, I think it's like an immediate misconception about us. It could, in theory, move, every month if you need it to, but that's not what it's intended to do. That wouldn't be cost effective. We call it a mobile microfactory because of our ability to modularize the factory itself, and also the ability to set it up anywhere very quickly. Meaning we don't have this massive fixed cost burden of renting like a giant warehouse that otherwise Amazon would be competing with you on, that becomes instantly 30-40% of your P&L on a fixed cost. We don't do that. We take a piece of land, the parking lot. There's slight modifications you need to make to the land, but then we just bring our containers over, inflate a structure, and we create a building out of thin air, basically. So it's a mobile microfactory for that purpose. But in theory, you could pick it up and move it. That being said, we only produce about 200 homes a year. You pick any market in the US, there's thousands of homes worth of demand. So we can keep servicing a certain region, because the factory, when it stands somewhere, it's servicing a 150-mile radius. You can keep servicing that area for many years.
Interesting. Okay, got it. That makes a ton of sense. So you touched on the opportunity here, trillions of dollars in this market alone, but it's also a very traditional sector. And you talked a bit about like some of the challenges there, which I want to talk about a bit more. There's obviously adoption, there's obviously the materials and things like that. What other unique challenges do you see or have you encountered in scaling such a disruptive idea in this industry?
I mean, I think anyone that understands manufacturing, and I think Elon Musk has said this probably more times than anyone, going from prototype to them doing something hundreds and thousands of times is the hardest part. Nothing hard. It's not hard to design. Like that's all the baby steps. But really, mass manufacturing something is incredibly hard. I'm lucky. My partner Oleg has a really fundamental understanding of how to do that. He actually wrote a book about it. It's called The Human Vector. It's pretty good. I think that's the hard part. And things generally in these categories takes more time, sometimes more money than you expect, but just growing pains. But it is a very conservative industry. That's probably the other, generally prop tech, construction tech, those categories. You're selling to maybe the most stubborn demographic of folks that make a lot of money already, folks that their job is to reduce risk, right? By adding new technology, you're not reducing risk at first. So the way we combat that is you just have to be that much cheaper than what they're doing today where they can't ignore you. And we're really trying not to do things so fundamentally different. So an example of this, historically in industrialized construction, folks try really hard to, like I said, change what the home is. They'll shove mechanical, electric, plumbing, like fire protection behind a wall panel, produce a wall panel, ship that wall panel to site. Problem is inspectors, because when a home gets built, you have different stages in which an inspector shows up to inspect certain things that have been built or delivered at given stages, like I said. They can't look behind the panel. So then there's a whole different certification process for that, which is different market by market, which is hard to scale. We kind of said, look, let's just do things the way they are today, and let's innovate within the, call it the confines of what's allowable.
Yeah. So and this is just like a little off piece, but I just want to understand and or help the audience understand as well. Who's your customer? So would I, as a developer potentially who has land, say I'm going to purchase one of these factories and then I own and operate it? Or is that something that you would do with, you mentioned the $10 million price tag for one of the factories. Is that something that the local government pays for, or how does it work?
It's kind of like, I wish there was a easier, it's kind of like a multi-pronged answer. So, and it depends on our timeline and where we are kind of in that timeline. But today, we'll partner with good operators generally that have enough capital to commit a portion or generally a larger portion than us to the 10 million to launch a mobile microfactory. Think of it as a factory in a box. It comes with everything. You just basically turn on the light switch. And then it allows you to vertically integrate and be able to basically bring general contracting and all the 22 subcontractors involved in the home building process in-house. So we're like the magic screwdriver for a home builder who generally doesn't usually build themselves. They're just a developer. They hire a GC. We allow them to basically verticalize and reduce costs significantly. But generally, they'll capitalize the mobile microfactory. We stay on to run it, and that's why we get paid a fee. Right now, the folks we partner with, they tend to commit to off-taking. So meaning they smoke their own supply, meaning they buy homes from their own factory, essentially. And then they go on to resell or re-rent the homes. But generally, we work with developers, and it's kind of like a B2B2B model. We don't have to necessarily, like if you, Greg, in your family office, for example, decided that they love manufacturing and you wanted to back a factory, that's fine too. But in this case, given you're not a developer, we would go find a bunch of local developers that would offtake from the factory.
Oh, interesting. So, yeah. I mean, it's got so many different wheels turning for me, and I'm sure people listening as well, because there's a lot to take in, but it makes a ton of sense. And you've mentioned that it obviously reduces the labor cost, reduces the speed, reduces a bunch of cost actually, but there's also like environmental waste as well, right? There's a number of areas that you guys can have an impact on. How can this method be applied globally? Is that a view that you're having right now, or is it just North America?
No. Our intent is for sure to be able to mass manufacture this, and apply it worldwide. So I'll answer this differently. What we're solving, again, is around skilled labor. The reason why it's important to solve for the unskilled labor is because it's missing. And because it's missing, it's in short supply. And because it's in short supply, it costs a lot. That's the most expensive piece of that dollar that it costs to build a home. So we want to drive that down as much as possible. So that has the most impact in first world countries. For example, in India, the coefficient between like the labor and the materials to build a home is like, almost equal, or maybe like even the labor is even less than the materials in India. In the US, it's kind of inverse. It's like 70% of cost being labor in most first world countries. So the way to think about it is like we create the most value where most folks don't want to be white. They don't want to be blue collar workers. So that's where we will have the most impact. So think Canada, Australia, Europe, US. So those are really kind of our target markets.
And we hear time and time again, especially on this show, about a lot of the automation and robotics that's being put in place, whether it's in manufacturing facilities, in logistics, and wherever. There's such a skill shortage anyway. And people that are so concerned about jobs being taken and all of that stuff, all of these industries, all of these spaces have such a deficit of talent. So people aren't doing the jobs, but the need is there and growing by the day. So yeah,
it's kind of ironic because you're a robotics show. So it's funny because robotics for us is at a later stage. I think anyone that preaches roboticizing or automating all steps of the home building process are lying. And I'll explain why. Tesla has automated a lot of their process. The reason being is because they benefited from so many years of Toyota's production system, which was meant to optimize and make efficient the unskilled labor, right? Or just labor in general. So no one's done Toyota's production system yet in construction. So how can you go automate? You don't know what to automate. You don't know what the most efficient thing ROI, what it is to automate. So only like 2 of our, 24 stations are semi-automated. The rest, it's still cheaper and more efficient to optimize for unskilled human labor. And later, when we've optimized that efficiency so much so that we can quantify the ROI that it makes sense to build a robotic or automated solution, we'll go do that to that station, but at a later point in time.
Interesting. Okay. So building a company like this obviously requires the tech talent that you mentioned, and you've talked about how you have that in Eastern Europe to mitigate costs, etc. But you also need operational expertise, and everywhere that you're going to set up these factories, you're going to need local talent as well. How do you guys approach building the right team, corporate, like for you guys, and then partnering with whoever your partners are going to be from an operational standpoint?
Yeah. On the corporate side, so Cuby Opco or Topco, whatever you want to call it. Oleg is my partner. He's one of the best process people I've ever met in my life. He can run, honestly, he can run a 10-person team as efficiently as a 1,000-person team. And that's partly what his book is about scaling deep tech teams. He has this philosophy, that's why it's called the human vector. Basically, anytime you have customers, partners, relationships, like everyone, you should find folks that are aligned, same vector, so you don't eventually, bump or diverge. So we try to approach hiring that way. And Oleg loves to hire talent that's specifically on the technical side he can mold. Because if someone comes with preconceived notions or have been trained in an old school way that you can't reshape, like he truly likes to craft leaders. He likes to start raw and craft someone into a leadership role. That's what he's very good at. But generally, I'd say our philosophy is to hire very curious, hungry people. We don't have bureaucracy. Anyone has a say. Anyone can tell us we're wrong, which we happen to be wrong a lot. Yeah, that's on our OpCo. And we found Eastern Europe to have an incredibly high concentration of STEM per capita, especially on the hardware side. I think hardware is just getting sexy again in the US. And there's an emerging talent pool, but historically it's all been about software. And I think the former Soviet countries have produced a lot of good engineers, and I feel like a lot of the mentality is a little different in the US. Some of the differences we like to joke that we've noticed is you have this double PhD Stanford grad, comes from mechanical engineering, and then you have like a Eastern European equivalent, right? And you say, look, there's a hole in this pipe. Go find out where the hole is. Stanford. they'll put like, I don't know, some sort of laser to like check where the hole is. They'll analyze the data, right? Eastern European engineer will run some blue colored dye water through it and be like, it's right there. That's like some of the practicality we've noticed is a bit different. It served us well in our ability to move quickly. In terms of hiring for each mobile microfactory, it's obviously a challenge. We're talking about putting 275 mobile microfactories out there. That means that once all of those are up and running, we'll be across all factories, even though they're different entities and we co-own them, but like across all of those, we're talking about employing like 100,000 people. That's still a challenge to hire. Hiring 260 people per mobile microfactory is a challenge. I mean, the beauty is they're unskilled. So 75% of those are unskilled, which makes it a lot easier to hire for. We've de-risked some of this we're putting one of our first mobile microfactories with our partners in Nevada. They're a part of an organization that's heavily involved with they have tens of thousands of veterans as part of that organization. So the goal is to hire as many veterans as possible. So we have access to an instant pool of human capital. Yeah, and human talent, capital. Yep. So that's one way we're de-risking, but we hope kind of as our brand reputation grows, and these are great jobs, we hope that it gets easier. Same way as, Tesla's first factory was probably not easy to hire for. That being said, we're not hiring 20,000 people. We're hiring 260. That's over 3 years as we ramp up. So
I love that you have all of these numbers readily available and you're already aware of everything that you need. I think that's also a big hurdle that companies run into when they're looking at, especially setting up in new regions or going down a new project route or something like that. It's kind of like you make it up as you go along. You don't know how many you're going to need. And a lot of that work's been done ahead of time for you. So even before you open a new region or spin up a construction site and factory, you can do some of that.
We know because we have our first of a kind up and running. So we know what that is. And then you multiply that by 2 given scale. It's kind of a very linear equation. But look, at the end of the day, assumptions are assumptions, variables are variables, right? Things change. You have to be able to adapt to those changes. You have to, I think, bake in very heavy margins, like margin for error, in a lot of calculations that we do. So we try our best.
Nice. What qualities do you think are essential when you're hiring for companies like yourself, disrupting a traditional sector?
On the OpCo side?
Yeah.
Again, we want folks that are incredibly curious. We like good energy. I think Oleg and I both have a pretty high moral compass. We have values, very traditional values. So we look for those things. I think we definitely like folks that are technical. Oleg and I have this belief that engineers can do anything. That's like, I just had a daughter, so I would say like, go study to be an engineer because you could do anything as an engineer. It's a process way of thinking. Yeah, but we generally like folks that are excited about what we're building, and we feel like what we're building resonates with a lot of people because who can't relate to being in 4 walls, right? It's where we live, work, play. It's, essentially the 4 walls make up our entire life. I think Americans spend like 90+% of their life indoors. So folks can relate to not being able to afford a house, the housing crisis. So I think we find a lot of folks that are passionate when they come and ask for a job.
Amazing. Obviously, sustainability as well is a big thing for you guys. Is there a particular goal that you're excited about achieving as a company?
Yeah, so we don't ever talk about sustainability necessarily. We think like that no one should ever lead with that. Unit economics should be the driver. That being said, if we're going to do something, we might as well do it right the first time. So naturally, given what we're doing, I think there's a couple stats that stand out. I think something like 40% of landfills are filled with construction waste. So I don't know if you've ever been like, yeah, it's something very large. Don't quote me, but it is something in that realm. And I know for a fact for every house that gets built, there's about 4 tons of waste, which is a lot of waste, right? You would think like, if you ever go in front of if you're ever in the suburbs somewhere and you drive by a house being built, usually there's like one of these blue big like container like trash bins. Sometimes it looks like there's more waste than there is house, right? A lot of rework, and it's because it's not like building a car where you know exactly the amount of parts you need, how they come together. Like it's not like that. It's more guesswork. We're going to bring a bunch of stuff on site that we have to unpackage, cut, prep. Then we're going to put it together, and a lot of times there's a lot of mistakes. So then you end up reworking, like throwing stuff out. etc. So naturally, given we're approaching this from a lean manufacturing perspective, we reduce like a good 90+% of waste that typically otherwise would be on a construction site. Also, we're quicker, so there's less noise pollution, right, in neighborhoods. Also, for context, our homes use steel and rivets for framing instead of wood. So our homes naturally become more durable, given it's not just about like sustainability. It's okay, our world is changing. Look what just happened in North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, right? We're living in a very different world. So building kind of shitty homes that get, blown over is not ideal. So how do you build more durable homes? Because insurance costs are going up. So we think about things like that. And on top of that, you can literally calculate the thousands and thousands of tons of emitted CO2 that we reduce because we're almost like this last mile solution. We don't have to transport something thousands of miles that takes up a lot of space and weighs, tons. So there's a lot of associated not embodied carbon, a lot of CO2 emissions that we're reducing.
I had no idea about that amount of waste, but again, makes a ton of sense. I live in an area that's predominantly new build, and I remember when they were building these massive skips, that's what we call them in England anyway, but yeah, just full and just being carted in all the time. Yeah, that is crazy percentage. Let's look at the future of the construction space. Do you think traditional methods will ever fully adapt to modern techniques? I know it's like there's a lot of resistance in like these more traditional industries, or do you think that they'll just try and put their head in the sand and continue to resist the change?
I think, the answer to the future is always history, right? I mean, we literally have been building the same, like, honestly, I mean, I'll start with a joke, actually. There's kind of this construction joke that if Jesus were to come back to earth, the only profession he'd still recognize is, the construction industry, the carpenter, right? Because it hasn't evolved very much. We've literally been building homes the same way we've been building them for hundreds of years. So therefore, if you look at past informing the future, we'll likely continue to do that. The industry is really, really big. It's going to take a very long time to go and completely, we don't like to say transform or disrupt. We think that doesn't work in traditional spaces. To slightly 1 degree pivot, right? And make process and delivery mechanism better. But we think that it'll continue to be this way. It's too big of an industry. That being said, I think COVID was a really big, there's a lot of macro tailwinds, like the obvious, I think, and there was a survey done that the biggest challenge that most GCs face, like 80% voted that they have a hard time hiring labor. You physically, next time, Greg, go drive by one of those construction sites, you'll see the guys that are swinging hammers, they're like 40, 50 years old at this point. In the US, there's a statistic around about 40% of the workforce is going to retire by 2031. And it's only being replenished at a pace of like 7-1, 7 retiring, 1 replacing. So it's going to be a big problem. The more that becomes a problem, the more folks will have to adapt and look for solutions. But I think post-COVID, all the supply chain shocks, kind of interest rate increases, folks are looking for ways to make up the margin and to de-risk. So adoption is happening. It's going to take a long time. Historically, this has been a really hard category. Hard to predict how it evolves, but it kind of needs to evolve. It doesn't make sense that this is the only industry where productivity gain has been 1% versus every other industry. There's been like a 7 to 8x over the last 50 years in terms of productivity gain because of technology. So we'll see. Hopefully what we're doing can help in the least frictional way.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you see these traditional construction companies as like potential partners or obstacles for the company's future?
I think both. Our construction companies, even our mobile microfactory, essentially becomes a general contractor and the subcontractor, right? We're like the all-in-one to a home builder. But any general contractor can come to us and say, hey, we want a factory. It's a great idea. In fact, a group we're working with in Michigan, they're like a good medium-sized construction company, and they're excited about a factory because they're like, look, we know where the puck is headed. We got to de-risk, and this is a good way to mitigate that risk. So, I'm sure at some point we step on someone's toe as any other business, but for now we're saying, take our solution. We'll give it to you. No problem.
Very cool. Yeah. I guess it would make sense for them as well. Like, why not partner? Why not get ahead of it? You have
They'll
access
make more money. They're more efficient. We reduce costs. Like, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, for sure. Are there any other trends that you believe will change the industry within the next 5 years, or is there anything like that you're particularly excited about in the future of construction technology or prop tech?
I don't know. We're like an ostrich. We just like bury ourselves into like, our own soil.
Best way to be it.
Yeah, we don't look around too. I mean, I look around. It's part of my job, but Oleg does not care about what a single other industrialized construction company is doing out there. He doesn't care if they start using the same words we use. He could care less. It's about moving very fast, being on offense, and just building. That's all it is. So I don't know. There's a bunch of stuff happening on the software side, which I think will have high layers of adaptability. The problem is software is almost like a Band-Aid. You can't solve construction with just software. It's a physical problem at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm excited about just folks being excited about possible solutions in the construction ecosystem. And folks are waking up to the idea that it needs to get more efficient.
Perfect. Well, look, thank you so much for being on the show today. This has been really eye-opening, very interesting. Before you go, do you have any final thoughts or advice for entrepreneurs trying to do something, obviously not the same as you, but go into traditional industries and do something innovative?
Yeah. I mean, look, I hate giving advice because who are Oleg and I to give advice at this point? Maybe in 20 years when we do what we say we're going to do. But generally, I find it incredibly optimistic that Silicon Valley is really excited about backing real world problems. No one needs another direct-to-consumer t-shirt company, right? Folks are excited, I think, for the first time in a long time to solve really, really big problems that have to do with legacy industries. And I think it's a byproduct of post-COVID supply chain shocks, obviously labor shortages across the board, a housing crisis, like all the big things have kind of happened at once. And folks realize that there's massive opportunity to be able to solve some part or all the parts of some of these legacy industries. And both investors and incumbents are excited to see those solutions come to fruition. So like now's the time to build in these spaces, whether you call it frontier tech, deep tech, whatever. People want, obviously like atoms greater than bits type of thing. I think actually there's an individual by the name of Packy McCormick. If your audience wants to read his Substack, it's called Not Boring. And he wrote this 5-part series on what he coined this term vertical integrators. That has to do exactly with like full stack, vertically integrated companies taking on legacy industries. And if they're successful, these are the next, Andrew Carnegie's of the world. So I think it's a fascinating read, and I think it's very inspiring to read that. So I would recommend anyone in your audience that's interested in these categories to read that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's some great pointers there. Will they find the link on what they wrote about you guys recently as well there? Or is that
it's there. Yep.
Perfect.
There.
All right. Yeah, we'll be sure to put that in the show notes for everyone listening. Awesome. Well, look, thank you so much. Thanks again. Where can our listeners find out more about you guys, follow your journey, or connect with you if they're interested in working with you?
Yeah, no, I'm on LinkedIn. My name, last name, first name, I think they'll see. And then cubytechnologies.com, CUBY, and then the word technologies.com is always a good place to start. We try not to show too much, but I think it's enough to understand what we do.
Amazing. All right, cool. Well, look, we'll keep in touch. Hopefully we'll get you guys both on the show next year at some point. And I'm rooting for you. Thanks again.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate you having me.